Nowadays, we know the importance of having good hygiene and washing our hands, and this was not always the case. In history, before germ theory was discovered, it took a while for doctors to figure out the benefits of washing hands. And it wasn't until the mid-1800s where they were noticing a difference of mortality rate between doctors' wards and the midwives' ward for those that were helping to give birth. So in the doctor's ward, they had a higher rate of child bed fever and infection, whereas the midwives were having a lower rate. And so Ignaz Semmelweiz was a Hungarian doctor who was noticing that difference and wanted to study and look into what was causing those deaths. It was then in 1847 that the death of Semmelweiz's colleague led him to a breakthrough. His colleague had cut his finger on a scalpel during an autopsy when he was studying a cadaver and developed an infection that killed him. And that's when Semmelweis wondered whether a similar type of infection could be happening in the doctor's maternity ward, because he realized that unlike hospitals' midwives, doctors sometimes would examine the women in the maternity ward after performing autopsies, which is really gross when you think about it for a hard day. And that day, we have to remember that they didn't know that germ theory, and they didn't know anything about hygiene in general for that. And so at that point in time, he had just realized that his colleague had died because of cadaver matter when he had cut himself with a scalpel. And the woman in the doctor's ward might also be dying because doctors were coming and working with cadavers and then coming and helping in the maternity ward. So after he made that discovery, he then mandated that doctors had to wash their hands after autopsies. And then after that had happened, the mortality rate ended up dropping to the same level as the midwives in that part of the hospital. So this in general helped a lot with the public health because it gave a lot more general hygiene and learning more about the importance of washing hands. And later in the future, people made more discoveries and were more likely to advocate that surgeons would wash their hands and sterilize their instruments between patients. And nowadays, since we know about the germ theory, we understand the importance of making sure that everything's sterilized. But that was an important time in history just to know about the importance of actually washing our hands and knowing how to do that, and the importance of how it does affect our health.